I come from the other coast, from Reed. I spent a lot of time in Silicon Valley, but almost 5 years ago I moved to Boston, and I'm the director of the MIT Media Lab. The MIT Media Lab is a very unusual laboratory in the United States. It's 30 years old today, but it's part of MIT, which is a university, and but it's a strange lab in that it's first of all the only lab that also has an academic department. So in the United States, you have research labs that do the research, and then you have academic departments that give the degrees, and usually they are separated so that the students kind of go back and forth between research or classes. But we decided to put them together so that the research itself is also the academics. And so I'll talk a little bit about that. This is our new building. So we have about 700 people in our ecosystem. About 200 of them are faculty and other types of research scientists. We have about 100 staff. We have about 200 graduate students who are students but also researchers. So instead of having lectures, we do research as the way that people learn what they need to learn. And we have about 200 undergraduate students that also spend their research time at the Media Lab. And we have, and this is also a key part of the architecture of the Media Lab, is we're sponsored by companies. So we have over 80 companies that give money to the Media Lab. And most laboratories that you may know they write a proposal and they get some money and they have to deliver a thing. But the members of the Media Lab, they give us money that we use in a discretionary, undirected way. So they fund the lab, we do whatever we want to do, and then all of the members share in the intellectual property and the ideas. So everyone, all the companies and all the people can work together and share. So we have all of the competitors coming in together, like we have LG, Samsung, Huawei, Hisense, Toshiba, Nokia, and all these kinds of companies. And we work together in a community trying to envision the future. And so we have approximately a $60 million budget a year. So that's kind of the container. And we have what we call groups. So we have faculty members, each have a group. These are the symbols for each of the groups. They range in the kinds of things that we do. So we have everything from lifelong kindergarten, which is the idea that all of your life should be like kindergarten, where you're learning. We have people working on journalism. We have people working on robots. We have people working on opera. We have people working on synthetic biology. So the key thing for us is that because we have this opportunity to do anything we want to focus on things that no one else would do. So we recently did a search for faculty, and the requirement was that you had to be proficient in at least 2 orthogonal fields. That means 2 fields that aren't related, and that if you could get a job in any other university, you shouldn't apply to us. So we're looking for people who would never get a job anywhere, who could never get funded by anybody else, and that our output, we use the 3 words: uniqueness, impact, magic. Which is uniqueness, everybody only do things no one else would do. Impact, it has to positively affect the real world. And magic, it has to have some kind of story that's engaging and makes us feel passionate. So I'll give you a few examples of some of the research we're working on. One of them is, as you know, Google has started and all the car companies are working on autonomous vehicles. But one of the questions we have about autonomous vehicles is how they get programmed and what are the ethics. And so, for instance, one of the studies we do shows that people feel that a car should sacrifice its passenger, like run into a wall, in order to save 10 people. But fewer people would actually buy the car. And so the question then becomes, who should be making the rules? Should this be a commercial business? Should it be government? So these kinds of ethics and autonomous vehicles. We're also working on trying to understand agriculture and farming, and partially in an urban setting, can we grow food inside of the city in very high density? Expansion microscopy, one of the key areas is trying to understand the brain and making better and better tools for looking at small things, but we realize that by using certain chemicals, we can take a tissue and expand it so that we can then get higher resolution. So working in things like material science. This is a somewhat artistic project about making a 3D printed fluidic system that has synthetic biology that allows a possible future a space traveler to take light and turn it into food for themselves. Optogenetics is a somewhat technical but very important tool that we co-developed and are providing to the world, which uses genetic reagents to to make neurons sensitive to light, so that with light you can turn single neurons on or off, so that you can do things like therapeutics to help with things like epilepsy, or to be able to do research, or to be able to, for instance, solve blindness. Scratch is a very popular children's programming language that was developed, and it uses blocks, and it's open source. Any of you can use it online, and we have over 11 million projects that have been uploaded, so this is part of our learning group. And then this is computational optics. So many of you have glasses, but this is a system so that you can change the display using advanced light field and computational optics, so that instead of wearing the glasses, the display corrects for your vision. But those are some of the ideas that we've been working on. We have over 400 projects. But recently, a few months ago, the founder of the Media Lab, Nicholas Negroponte, and I were sitting in a room, and he said, bio is the new digital. And what this means is 30 years ago, when the Media Lab was founded, we didn't have digital technology. Digital technology was something that some people used. And how many of you remember when there was no internet? Okay, it's interesting because I was in Silicon Valley the day before yesterday, and almost everybody remembered, so you're a younger audience. But I think that if you remember, before there was internet, before digital, it was kind of a new idea. And no one thought that computers and internet would have anything to do with their business. But today, you can't imagine a business that isn't affected by internet. And I think it's the same thing with biology. So right now, the sciences around life science and biology are becoming so accelerated and so broad that many of you may think that biology is not important for you, but I think it's going to be important for everyone. And Reed showed these unicorns and these dragons, but one of the common themes about most of those companies is they're somehow affected by the internet and by low cost of computers, because the lowering cost enabled the innovation to happen at much lower cost, which means that startups can do this innovation instead of having to have big budgets and big companies. And that allows the venture capital that allows China and Silicon Valley to thrive. The cost of innovation for digital is also, for biology is also going down, creating very similar characteristics to biology. So let me describe this a little bit. So when I say biology, there's many, many things, but a good example is Sorona. So Sorona is a material that DuPont, the chemical company, makes. It's very similar to polyester or nylon. But what it does is it uses plants, it uses biological material, and uses a synthetic microbe to convert that plant material into polyester. And traditionally what happens when you make nylon or polyester is you use fossil fuels, oil, gasoline. But this new method is actually 30% more efficient than fossil fuels, and it's also very ecologically safe. The problem is this process, this microbe was designed, and it took about 7 years and $400 million to design this. So this obviously cost a lot of money and was done by a very large company. But the possibility of this is called DNA synthesis. So if you see the human genome and all genome on life is made up of these four things, A, G, C, and T, which are the four nucleotides, and then you can now put them together once you've designed a gene using a gene synthesizer. And so it's kind of like digital code. You can write a program and you can print it. And so it looks kind of like this. So if you look on the top, you can take all of these different codes, and we're creating what they call Biobricks. So little pieces of programs where we understand what this code means, and we put it into little boxes. And then we can program them, just like we program electric circuits or software. And then we print it, and you can put it in a yeast or into a bacteria and reboot it. And then that yeast or bacterial will hopefully do what you've programmed it to do. So for instance, to convert sugar into nylon, or to be a sensor, or to be memory, or to be medicine. And there are several pieces to this that are important. So the cost of sequencing genes, where we're learning about genes is by sequencing things that occur in nature, human beings, but plants and bacteria. And in 2003, it costs $3 billion to sequence the human genome. Okay? So this is Lumina. It's a desktop gene sequencer. Today, $3 billion is now $1,000. And this is a new device that came out a few months ago called Oxford Nanopore. It's a handheld device. It's a gene sequencer. The device plugs into the USB port of your laptop and can sequence genes. And this device only costs $1,000. So the cost of gene sequencing is going down faster than Moore's law, faster than computers. And printing is also going down in cost. So this is one of our faculty members, Joe Jacobson. And he is, right now what happens is when you try to print a gene, you go to a human factory where they use these pipettes and they put A, T, C, C, T, and they have to put them together by hand. It's kind of like when people used to make transistor radios by hand before we had integrated circuits. But now, on a chip, we can actually print DNA at much lower error rates and much higher speed. So both the sequencing and understanding of the genome, as well as the printing of the genome, is becoming lower cost and higher speed. But there are other similarities to digital. So this is a company that I recently invested in called Emerald Labs. And these are some students from Carnegie Mellon, I think, who decided, why do we have to sit in a lab and do this? And if humans are doing it, maybe they have errors. Maybe we can write a programming language. So this is like cloud biology. So what you do is you write the code, and then robots in the lab actually conduct the experiments. And one of the reasons why biology is sort of messy is that doing the experiment is kind of like an art. It's and depending on who does it, it's very different. But with robots and with precision, you can make biology a lot less random, and then you can also share the data. So this is also, and what's interesting is the people who are working on this kind of thing, they don't come from biology. They come from mechanical engineering, from robotics, from computer science. So you see a huge movement of talent into the biology space, and biology is starting to look a lot more like digital. But this is in the cloud. And similarly, just like you have community hackerspaces or places outside of institutions, outside of schools, outside of companies, we are starting to see community spaces where average people can go, people who aren't in university, and work on biology and learn about biology. This is actually my kitchen, and what we're doing here is we are using a computer program to design our own bacteria. And one of the things what we're trying to do is design a bacteria to create biolacin, which is an interesting target. It's an anti-parasite, it's a very expensive compound. It's about $350,000 a gram. But some scientists figured out how you might be able to create a bacteria using enzymes to create that thing. So we designed the bacteria. We got a kit to find the Biobricks, put the Biobricks together by hand, got the E. coli and inserted the E. coli and rebooted it, and we were able to create bacteria that we had designed to create violacin. And this a decade ago would have been very, very expensive and very, very difficult, but now doing recombinant DNA in your kitchen is actually not that hard, and for half of the people in this room, it was the first time they had worked in biology. So this is becoming kind of a common thing. I think that many of you may have worked at home with robot kits and other things, but now everyone is going to start working with biology kits. This is the International Genetically Engineered Machines Competition. We call it iGEM. This is started at MIT. And this is 3,500 kids from high school to college who get together every year, and they compete on designing different types of biology. So E. coli that smell like bananas, or some bacteria that can search for landmines. But these kids go and are doing amazing work, and they're starting from high school level. So the biological devices and life science has gone from large pharmaceutical companies into schools, into high schools, and it's really the kids that are doing some of this amazing stuff. Let's talk about kids a little bit. So I think what's important is that when we think about the internet, it's very difficult for people who don't understand the internet to design things for the internet or work on the internet. And similarly, I think the kids who are growing up in this mobile world are very different from people like me who remember when we didn't have cell phones. And I think their brains are fundamentally different. And I think that what we have to be careful about is when we design our educational system, that we don't design a system based on our assumptions, but we design a system for the environment that the children are going to be living in. So the children, you have to assume, are going to be connected all the time. They will have artificial intelligence systems that can be very good at doing math and looking up information, and that they'll be working in groups, and it'll be a very creative society. And so right now, what does education look like? It looks kind of like this, right? So this picture could have been 100 years ago. It could have been 10 years ago. It could be right now. And we know that this system may not work so well. So I personally actually dropped out of college 3 times. And the system didn't work for me because I felt like college was reading the whole encyclopedia before they let you do anything. But today, with the tools that you have, it's much more interesting to look up the things when you need them and be focused on doing something that you're interested in. So we did a test. So we're at MIT, so we like to do tests. I think many of you know, this is called a polygraph. This is to tell if you're lying or not. But it uses an interesting phenomenon that when your brain is active, the conductivity of your skin changes. So by putting electrodes on your skin, you can tell people's arousal and brain. And so what we designed was we designed a sensor that you could put on your hand to do the same thing, to measure the galvanic skin response. And we put it on a student for a week. And this is what you see. So it's interesting. You can see, it turns out that when you're sleeping, your brain actually moves. When study, you see it moving. But on the right-hand side, you see yellow. It says class. That's lecture, right? It's very flat. You know, you see at the very top, it says relax. Class is flatter than relax, right? I would argue, though, that maybe this isn't a new thing. I think this may have been true when I was going to school, too. But now we can measure it. And so what we realize is this kind of lecture mode is not the best mode for learning. And actually, learning has other things that might contribute to it. So personally, for me, what's very important at the Media Lab, we call it the 4 Ps. Projects, peers, passion, and play. And what this means, so I'll go through each one. So projects, so in normal schools that we attend, you use textbooks, right? And you learn math and formula. And we have about 100 years of research that shows that you can't apply learning from one context to another very easily. So it's very hard to learn in a textbook, and it's hard to learn what you apply in a textbook into the real world. It's much easier to learn about mechanics when you're building an engine, or to learn about chemistry when you're cooking. And so we know that it's much easier to learn when you have a project. So at the Media Lab, we focus on project-based learning. The other one is peers. So I think many of you must know this intuitively, but you see the children, and they're always teaching each other, whether it's about video games or whatever. And we have seen that children remember better if they hear it from a friend than if they hear from their teacher. And if they teach it, they learn even more. And so for us, the students working with each other is extremely important. And passion is that you're excited about something, you want to get this done. I'm a scuba instructor, so when I take my students scuba diving, they'll learn the science, they'll learn the math, they'll learn everything they need to do because they have a passion in the scuba diving. And play. So there is a very interesting set of research that shows that if you put pressure on people and you give them financial reward, they can do incremental things, non-creative things, faster. But if you're trying to do something creative, like invent the iPhone, or do something that is not just a linear progression, that actually play is more important for its success than pressure. And so for us, if you think about existing education, it's the opposite. It's not projects, textbooks. You better not be cheating. We grade you on what you can do by yourself. And we don't care if you have passion, and you better not be playing. So right now, I think the standard education is kind of the opposite of what we think is important for creative education. And what's important more than anything about creativity is that as machines get smarter and we get connected, like right now, if you imagine, it's kind of like if you finish school, it's preparing you to be on top of a mountain by yourself with a pencil and no friends and no phone, right? But that never happens. You always have your phone, you always have your friends, you always have the ability to look things up. And in the future, we will always have artificial intelligence. So what we are looking for from human beings is passion, projects. It's the kind of sloppy, messy, creative part is going to be the role of human being in society. So imagine the tests that your children are taking, and then think to yourself, could a computer pass this test in the future? And if the answer is yes, you're training your child to do something that in the future a computer will do. And I think the problem with many schools around the world is we're educating our children to be robots, to be obedient, to be on time, to answer questions instead of ask questions, when in the future, robots will be robots and humans should be humans. Thank you.